Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, a Northside numbers game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available, ad-free, to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS+, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS+, a spin on the baseball metric OPS+. Love the pod or hate it, please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's November 20th. We're 2 days from the non-tender deadline, and Jed is showing signs of life. With the non-tender deadline looming and the Cubs being active, let's dig into the roster and talk about what to look for over the coming weeks. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome into episode 94, the Felix Heredia episode of this podcast. Heredia was a journeyman reliever who played for the Cubs from 1998 to 2001. And he wore number 94 in 2001 when he posted a 6.17 ERA over 35 innings before moving on to the Blue Jays, Reds, Yankees, and Mets before calling it a career after the 2005 season. So here we are, 2 days away from the non-tender deadline. Things are moving. That's what I like to see. Seemed like last offseason, I guess we did enter the Brian Servanet era of this offseason by trading for backup catcher Matt Tace from the Angels today. I'm not sure if I said that right. I think it's Tace, but it could be Thace. May not even be a Cub long enough for that to matter. We'll see. But the Cubs made some moves today, and that's always nice. I was going to record today anyway, and so it's always nice when the Cubs give me something to talk about. So the Cubs today made a few moves. Well, they made some moves yesterday. So yesterday was the deadline to get guys who were eligible for the Rule 5 draft onto the 40-man roster, and the Cubs decided to go with Owen, who's a no-brainer. He absolutely would have been drafted in the Rule 5 and stayed on somebody's roster, and the Cubs would have lost the top 100 prospect. So absolute no-brainer, was never in doubt. He got added to the 40-man roster, and then so did Ben Cowles, who came over with Jack Neely in the Mark Leiter Jr. trade with the Yankees. And Cowles he came over, he had gotten hit by a pitch and broke his hand or wrist, I can't remember, right before coming over in the trade. So he missed the rest of the regular season. The Cubs did send him to Arizona Fall League to get some time and get some reps in. And the Cubs thought he was at risk of being taken. So they added him to the 40-man roster. And that, to account for that, the Cubs made a couple, not disappointing. I mean, I think we all saw it coming. But it's sad to see Adbert, Alzolay, and Brennan Davis designated for assignment. I think there's a fair chance at least one of the two, possibly both, come back to the Cubs on a minor league deal. But I remember the days when the Cubs did not have 8 top 100 prospects, and it seemed like Braylon Marquez, Brennan Davis, and Adbert Alzolay were the only hopes. And now at the current moment, none of them are with the Cubs in any kind of roster spot. Just a quick talk about the people who were leaving. I mean, Adbert was the Cubs closer in 2023. He was a young, promising pitcher coming up. As a starting pitcher, had a bunch of injuries, couldn't stay healthy long enough to really stick. Didn't stick as a starter, went to the bullpen, and started having some success out of the bullpen. I mean, he was good off and on, still had injury issues. 2003. Let's not talk about that season. 2023, he had a really nice season. He came on and eventually became the closer, converted, I think it was 19 out of 22 saves, and came into this past season as the closer on paper. And it didn't go well, but it also, he faded towards the end of 2023. I think he was having clearly he had some injuries. He ended the season on the injured list. Didn't really look his full self in spring training. Starting the season, obviously, he struggled famously, blowing 5 saves in less than a month before losing the closer spot and then going down for the year. Ultimately determined that he needs Tommy John surgery. So he had that. And he's probably not going to pitch until, at best, the very tail end of 2025. So it made sense for the Cubs to designate him for assignment. And he'll have a chance, if he wants to leave the Cubs organization, he'll have a chance. Well, we'll see if he gets claimed first. If he gets claimed or if somebody trades for him. I don't think the Cubs would trade, but see if somebody claims him. I would tend to say no. And then the Cubs will have choice. They'll both have choices. He could opt to be a free agent, go sign with another team potentially, but probably what he's looking at this point in his career is a minor league contract that will let him join a team, hopefully stay with the Cubs, and rehab that arm, and then have a chance to come back. I could see the Cubs signing him to like a 2-year minor league deal. That's what the Red Sox did with Michael Fulmer last year after he had season-ending Tommy John surgery coming off his 2023 season with the Cubs. So I'm pretty optimistic, actually, that Adbert's going to come back. I think the Cubs organization really likes him. I think he likes being part of the Cubs organization. Famously, he's got some very good friends on the team, like best bud Justin Steele. So we'll see what happens. But I'm hopeful that his recovery goes well. I would like to see him stick. The other one is Brennan Davis. I've never heard anybody in the Cubs org, any level, any player, any coach, have anything but rave reviews for Brennan Davis. I mean, he's been so much fun to watch him come up. At one point, he was a top, I think he cracked the kind of consensus top 15 for prospects in all of baseball. I know he was definitely top 20. Looked really promising, and then had that back injury, and he just had a series of injuries since that. Some seem like maybe some chronic things that may hold out, but it's awful. He had a really hot stretch earlier this season. I was hoping he was going to get a chance to get a call up. I mean, the guy deserves to get some shot in the major league somewhere. So we'll see. I doubt he'll be claimed given his injury status, but who knows? I mean, he's still 24 years old. And when he showed last year when he's actually healthy and can get out there, he can still damage a baseball and play a good defensive outfield. So we'll see. I could see him potentially signing a minor league deal with the Cubs, but also the Cubs are pretty deep in outfield prospects. So we'll see. And by being designated for assignment, if he did sign with the Cubs on a minor league deal, he would not be on the 40-man. So he would have to play his way into being added to the 40-man, which would really only happen before he got an official call-up. But for him, I want him to have some success, have a shot. So if he becomes a free agent and he finds another team that can give him a shot, that's got a clearer path to the majors than the Cubs, he should take it. I will always be in his corner rooting for him. But I think those were two moves the Cubs had to make. And what I was going to talk about today before these other moves happened was to really go through, kind of build on what Sarah Sanchez and I talked about last week on episode 93. If you haven't listened to it yet, go check it out. She and I, it was her idea originally, but we decided to go back and use the same budget that Jed Hoyer spent last year, and see what we could do with it in ways different than what he did. And so we each made some non-tender decisions. We picked some free agents. We had some overlap. We had some disagreement. And it just was kind of a thought exercise on how you can build a team in the offseason. And I'm going to kind of apply that this year. I've got some things I want to walk through with the current roster, and some we've already seen kind of come to fruition. So the other moves today were the Cubs traded for relief pitcher Eli Morgan from the Cleveland Guardians, and they traded A-ball outfield prospect Alfonsin Rosario to the Guardians. I think Rosario is the Cubs' 21st ranked prospect for the most part, I think, in by most rankings. People are high on him for good reason. He's got a ton of power, a lot of offensive potential. I think a solid outfielder, not a particularly strong defensive outfielder, but a lot of power, but also a lot of swing and miss. He had 16 home runs this year in Myrtle Beach, which is not an easy place to hit home runs. But he strikes out, 30+% of the time in A-ball. So, I mean, there are things, and he's 20 years old. So there are maybe 20 or 21. He's young and he's got time. And there are absolutely universes where he comes up and becomes a good productive major leaguer, maybe even better than that. But there are also plenty of universes where he doesn't make it all the way up. And we were just talking about Brennan Davis. I mean, Brennan Davis was an absolute lock of a major leaguer like 2 years ago. And now he's never gotten a shot, and we'll see if he ever does. Injuries happen, stagnation happens, and he's got a lot of ground to make up. I mean, he's got to get that swing and miss rate down, more discipline at the plate. But, the Cubs got Eli Morgan, who does not throw particularly hard, not a huge K guy, but he's been very effective, really low barrel rates, really low hard contact rates, and just gets outs. He eats innings, and then, he'll be in middle relief for the Cubs. We're not talking about a major leverage reliever here. But he's got a really good changeup. He's got a decent tight slider. A fastball that kind of plays into the margins. I mean, it's not a great fastball, but it's good enough to work off that changeup. I've not done a ton of analysis on Eli Morgan, so I'll probably have more to say in the coming weeks. But what I looked at today is solid. The guy's effective. Cleveland's bullpen is amazing, and it's a scenario where they've got some guys coming back from injury. They've got a couple prospects that have shown they're ready. And so Morgan is a guy hitting arbitration this year. He's not going to be crazy expensive. It looks like estimates for him are about $1 million for this coming year. But again, like the Guardians have a lot of other guys that have really good bullpen and guys who are cheaper, frankly. But the Cubs pick up a guy who still has a minor league option. So if he does struggle and does have to be sent to the minor leagues for whatever reason, he has an option. The Cubs could do that. He's got 3 years of team control left. This is his first option year. He wouldn't be a free agent until 2028. I think it's a good get. It's a good starting point in the middle of that bullpen. Like we've talked about it a lot. Sarah Sanchez and I talked a lot last week about the Cubs needing more bullpen depth, and this is another useful piece. And it's a bit of a contrast to some of the guys that they've been picking up more and more hard throwers. But Morgan's a guy that can go in the middle. He can throw multiple innings. Got a pretty versatile arm. Had a really good season last year. Like every reliever, there's a little bit of volatility. Previous year, the results weren't as good. He struck out more guys though, so kind of back and forth. But I'm excited that the Cubs also picked up Tyler Zombro from Tread Athletics this week, and they've got him as a special assistant working with every level of the Cubs pitching staff. And he's a guy. He's young. He's 30. He was a promising pitcher in the Rays organization until he took a 104-mile-an-hour line drive off his head and almost died on the mound. But he's helped establish driveline. He's really well respected in the pitcher development game, working with a lot of guys in the offseason. And I think he's really going to help the Cubs step up their pitching development game, which has already stepped up from the non-existent pitching development game they had prior to Craig Breslow coming over after the 2019, really, I guess since 2021. He came over after 2019, but with COVID, it didn't really start seeing much effect until 2021. So like he's a guy that can work with these pitchers they're getting and the new guys have gotten in the system. So the other move today was, like I said, Matt Tace. Got him for cash considerations. This is a depth move. I've seen some people thrilled that they picked up a catcher. Cool. Now they have a backup catcher on the 40-man roster, which they didn't have this morning. Not a major move. Maybe not even a guy who's on the 40-man roster come spring training. I mean, this is like Brian Servant territory here from what the Cubs did last year. Cash considerations means they basically gave the Angels probably $25,000 or $50,000. Brought him over. We'll see. I mean, the answer at catcher, I'm quite confident, is not going to be Miguel Amaya and Matt Tace. Tace doesn't hit much, but he's a catcher. So I guess that's what they need at this point. So let's walk through some of the changes to the roster. So I had already pulled out, so there were already some guys that they had designated for assignment that they had cut to get down to 40 5 days after the World Series. And then since then, they've now DFA'd Patrick. The other big move today was they designated Patrick Wisdom for assignment. I've talked a lot on this podcast about how the roster construction didn't make sense when you had Patrick Wisdom and Nick Madrigal together. And then as things evolved, Patrick Wisdom really didn't have much of a role in this team either, and it less so going forward. Because now, with what's happened over the last year, you've now got Pete Crow Armstrong going in center field. Presumably, unless he has major fall off, he's going to continue to play out there. Patrick Wisdom, Cody Bellinger opted into his contract for this season, so he's presumably your right fielder unless there's a big trade, which pushes Seiya Suzuki to DH. So you don't even need Patrick Wisdom as potentially the right-handed half of a DH platoon. You've got Wisdom, Wisdom off my brain, clearly. Michael Busch and Cody Bellinger to rotate at first base. We'll see what else they do this offseason. But it just really didn't make sense. Patrick Wisdom is a wonderful human being. He quite correctly nominated as the Cubs Roberto Clemente Award recipient this year. I got to see him firsthand at Cubs Convention last year. I mean, basically saved a kid from basically the pit of despair. This kid got up and absolutely froze, was terrified by the crowd, went to tears, and Patrick was able to eventually coax a really good question out of the kid. And he's great with the fans. He's great with the crowd. We were at a game during the Toronto Blue Jays series, and during one of the rain delays, my son went down and asked him to sign a ball, and Wisdom screwed with him a little bit. It was great. They had a lot of fun in the interaction. He's a great person. He's been a good clubhouse guy. He's hit some big bombs. He's the last remnant of what got us through the end of the 2021 season after the Cubs traded all the old core. It was like, let's see how many bombs Patrick Wisdom and Frank Schwindel can hit. And they did it, and he's given us a lot of enjoyment, but it's just not good enough. Like, Cubs bench has to be better. They have to be deeper. They have to be more versatile. And so this is a start. And so tomorrow is the non-tender deadline. The other trigger for me is Nick Madrigal. I was pretty confident they were going to let him go, and I was not sure about Patrick Wisdom. So seeing that Patrick Wisdom went today, unless the Cubs think they have a trade path for Nick Madrigal, I would bet that he's going to be non-tendered by Friday. Friday at 5 o'clock Central, or I think 5 o'clock Central, 5 o'clock Eastern, I don't know, something like that, is the non-tender deadline. So if the Cubs are not going to tender somebody a contract, they have to make that known with the league, let the player know, then that player becomes a free agent. This is what happened to, Kyle Schwarber. That gets a lot of attention in Cubs circles. It's also what happened to Cody Bellinger. That's how Cody Bellinger became a free agent. So going down the list, going down the roster, I think there are a few things to factor in. Like, one, is the player good? Is the player redundant to other things on the roster? Because when the Cubs are putting this together, you build a 40-man roster, and that's effectively, think of like an organizational depth chart. You've got your 26-man roster that you carry active in games, and you're going to have on the major league roster, you're going to have your 5 starting pitchers. Pretty much every team is going to max the 13 allowable pitchers, so you're going to have 8 relievers in the bullpen. You're going to have, obviously, every position on the field has to be filled, so that's another 8. And then you're going to have a backup catcher, and you're going to have a 4th outfielder, and then the last 3 guys kind of depends on the team. You might have, if Seiya Suzuki is kind of perm DH, then he takes up one of those spots. You're going to have, a utility infielder. You're going to have probably a corner infielder, and then kind of the last one is just maybe your best bat. Is it going to be a infielder or outfielder, whoever happens to be the best bat? And then with the rest of the 40-man spots, you need at least 4 more starting pitchers, probably 5, or the Cubs have a couple guys who can potentially go either direction. You're going to need more relievers. There's going to be a shuttle going between Des Moines and Chicago. There always is. And that's what you need. You need that depth of arms. Guys are going to get hurt. Guys are going to struggle. You're going to want to have young guys that can go up and down, because you're going to have some vets that don't have any options left and aren't free or came in on veteran contracts. And then from the position side, you just want some overall depth across the board. Obviously, your top prospects on the 40-man right now, if they don't make the major league roster to start the season, Owen, Caissie, Kevin Alcantara are going to be in that mix somewhere. They just added Ben Cowles to the list. He'll be on the 40-man roster. But there's some important things the Cubs almost always have is they want a mix of righty and lefty bats. They want to have an organizational third shortstop. So it doesn't have to be on the 26-man active roster, because Nico Horner can be the backup shortstop. But you need an organizational third, potentially a 4th. This year they had both Luis Vasquez and Miles Mastrobuoni. Vasquez hitting from the right side, Mastro hitting from the left. The Cubs like that utility player lefty bat profile. It was Zach McKinstry when they traded for him, and then Miles Mastrobuoni replaced McKinstry. So I know a lot of people want Mastrobuoni off this team. That may happen. Who knows? He could get non-tendered on Friday. But he probably isn't going anywhere until the Cubs find somebody else to fill that profile on the 40-man roster, which can certainly happen over the course of the offseason. So, no predictions there. But some of the things that factor into these decisions are obviously there's money. Obviously, the player's talent. Is the player good? Also, options. Some of these guys who are going to be off the 40-man, or people who don't have options can't be on the 40-man and not on the active roster. So guys who have no options left cannot be sent down to the minors. That's one of the big things in that bullpen. You're going to want depth of arms, and you want guys who can go back and forth. Because if you have an option year, it allows you to be sent down 5 times before you have to be designated for assignment. You cannot send a guy down a 6th time. So that's where we see guys like Keegan Thompson, Javier Assad at times, Hayden Wozniacki, had bounced up and down between the majors and the bigs. And obviously you want guys who can stick, but sometimes there's just injury. And you want to have more than, 8 solid relievers that you can go to over the course of a season. So when I look down the roster, I mean, there probably will be trades. So some of these starters may get traded. Totally fine. But with what they have today, let's start walking through it. So if we, on the current 40-man roster, Cody Bellinger probably slots in right field, starting pretty much every day. Dansby Swanson's your starting shortstop. Those are the 2 highest paid players at $26.7 million, $25.3 million. Ian Happ next at $20 million. He's going to slot in left field. Seiya Suzuki probably slots at DH, making $17 million. And so let's do the position players, and we'll come back through the pitchers. I think the position players are a little more straightforward. Nico Horner's your starting second baseman, your backup shortstop, making about $11.7. Patrick Wisdom is now designated for assignment, so he is off the list. And then you go Miguel Amaya at catcher for league minimum, Michael Busch at first base for probably league minimum. Third base would be Itzhak Paredes on paper right now. He's estimated to get almost $6.3 million in arbitration this year. And then you've got talked about Ian Happ on left. You got Pete Crow Armstrong, Dansby at short, Pete Crow Armstrong in center field at the league minimum, Cody Bellinger in right. So when you look at the bench, unless the Cubs trade him, I assume Mike Tauchman is going to be that 4th outfielder. He does a pretty good job there. He's pretty cheap. He's estimated to get $2.6 million in arbitration this year. Kind of pretty much a bargain for what he's able to provide off the bench. And then right now, Miles Mastrobuoni or Luis Vasquez, one of those two is going to be on the roster pending other moves. So this is all like as the roster sits today. Either one of those guys will be on the roster for league minimum, about $800,000. And they'll need a backup catcher, which currently would be Matt Tace for about, he's estimated to get about $1.25 million this year as an older player. So I think that's pretty easy. Now the question is going to be how many of the kids push for a job? Like I think the Cubs seem to like Miles Mastrobuoni more than they like Luis Vasquez. I think that roster spot will actually be some third player that maybe isn't even in the Cubs organization at this point. Can Kevin Alcantara push for a job in Chicago? We'll see if Nick Madrigal gets the designated for assignment tag. We'll see if Matt Mervis stays in the organization. Owen Caissie, he's now added to the 40-man. So is he somebody who can push for a role? Alexander Canario. Now, of the position players, Alexander Canario is interesting. He has no options left. So my guess is he may be included in a trade this offseason. If not, he's probably one of your bench bats. Because I don't think they will. I think he's interesting enough, given his power profile, that he could be included in some trade somewhere. Like he's not going to be a major showcase trade, center of some big get, but he can either be a nice add-on to kind of sweeten a deal, or maybe you get, an interesting arm back or something for him, bullpen arm, something like that. But he has no options left, so he's either on the 40-man roster or he's probably elsewhere. He would also potentially be a candidate for non-tender, but I don't think that'll happen. I think he's so cheap, I think they'll just work on trading him or giving him a chance to make the team out of spring training. And we see trades in spring training too, when guys like him, like if he's not going to beat out Caissie or Alcantara, then they'll probably work out a deal and send him to somebody who had some outfielder get hurt. So I think that kind of locks in where the Cubs are position-wise. I think going to spring training, I think Matt Shaw will have every opportunity to win a job. But teams in general, and Jed Hoyer specifically, really hoard these roster spots. They really look at them closely. They don't like to give them up. That's why you're not seeing, so far, we're not seeing the Cubs make a bunch of DFA decisions, non-tender decisions. They do it right before the deadline. They do it right when they have to, because you never know what's going to happen. And so they'll keep guys as long as possible. So whoever they don't non-tender on Friday, don't just assume they're going to be on the roster or even make it to spring training. They may be cut elsewhere. You know, if the Cubs, Cubs around this time last year, the Cubs signed Brian Serven, just like they picked up Matt Tice today. And Brian Serven, I think, was on the Cubs 40-man roster for 5 days, something like that. It was very short. And they found somebody else they liked better. They got that person and let Brian Serven go. You're going to see a lot of that this offseason. You're going to see a lot of small moves that ultimately mean nothing. They're depth. There's an interesting player the Cubs get. Maybe they send him down to the complex and then don't like what they see and let him go. But on the pitching side in particular, I think the rotation right now is going to be obviously Justin Steele, Shota Imanaga, Jamison Tyone are locked in. I think between Javier Assad and Jordan Wicks, you maybe have one more. I think the Cubs are going to go get a free agent pitcher or trade for a starting pitcher. I think they're going to get somebody to try to upgrade that rotation and take Kyle Hendricks' spot. You know, I kind of piecemealed an exercise like we did last offseason, and I'll just talk through it real quick. I'll have to revisit as guys go on and off the market. But, you know, the same exercise I did last week with Sarah, take the money the Cubs currently have, spend right up to the CBT cap, and see what you can get. Well, using estimates from SpotTrack on what, you know, the player's market value is, who knows if this is what they'll actually sign for. Guys are high and low all the time. And this is before the trade for Eli Morgan. So I have the Cubs bringing in 3. They maybe don't bring in 3 relievers now. Maybe they bring in 2. Or maybe there are more trades and whatever. But I have them picking up Shane Bieber for about $25 million to come in and probably on a incentive-laden deal, maybe 2-3 years, maybe an opt-out in there for Bieber if he's able to show and get back to his ace-level stuff. In the bullpen, I brought Jorge Lopez back for about $3 million is what he's estimated for. Ryan Stanek for $3 million, and AJ Minter, who I love. I would love to see the Cubs get AJ Minter from the Braves for about $3 million is what he's projected for. And then I even took a look at Alex Bregman at third base for about 30. I don't know. Hard to see the Cubs going $30 million on Bregman, but it'd be fun. That's something like what I would do. And then for the backup catcher, I like Kyle Higashioka, who's been with the Padres. He'd be a good, solid veteran pickup, could help mentor Miguel Amaya. And if the Cubs are really, and I put this list together before Roki Sasaki was available. I would love for the Cubs to go get Roki. But Higashioka could be another nice player bridge to the Japanese connections the Cubs have. He'd be able to work with the Japanese pitchers, and I think it could go quite well. So I would love to see the Cubs pick him up. But that aside, let's get back to talking about the 40-man roster and the pitching side. So the Cubs want to have versatility, both in terms of starter reliever. You're going to want depth. You need guys. I mean, the Cubs last year used 9 starters, I think, if we don't count openers. They used 11 the year before. Guys are going to get hurt. They are. And we don't know. We haven't seen enough yet out of Jordan Wicks, Ben Brown, to know, can they stick? I think they're both capable of it, but we got to see more. Can Cade Horton come back, be healthy this year, and push for Major League time? So, Cade Horton's not even going to factor in here because he's not on the 40-man roster. Just like I just mentioned, Matt Shaw potentially pushing for time, but they're not going to add those guys to the 40-man roster until they are about to come up to the big leagues, because there's no reason to reduce your own flexibility if you're not going to be bringing them up until you have to. Like Owen Caissie had to. He's going to be Rule 5 eligible. Kevin Alcantara was on the Yankees 40-man roster when the Cubs made that trade. Canario and Caleb Killian were on San Francisco's 40-man roster when the Cubs made that trade. And so every year there are guys the Cubs have to put on there, and then they will roll with it. So when you look at the pitchers, I think top 3 starters are locked in. Javier Assad is going to be on the Major League roster somewhere, either in the rotation or coming out of the bullpen. Then it starts getting interesting. So which pitchers don't have options? On the position player side, Miguel Amaya, unless he's traded, will be part of the Major League roster as long as he's healthy and isn't a complete disaster in spring training. But he also has no more options. So he is going to start or back up with the Cubs, or it will probably end his time with the Cubs. But I'm optimistic with the changes he made last offseason. So let's go through the pitchers that have no options. Steele doesn't, but that's not really in play anyway. Mike Tauchman also has no options. And okay, so let's do a position player side with options. Mike Tauchman, Itzhak Paredes, Miguel Amaya do not have options. Mastroboni does. Canario does not. Tice does not. So that kind of plays in. It's not going to impact whether or not Itzhak Paredes is on the team or whether Mike Tauchman's on the team, but starting those guys in Iowa or sending them down is just not an option. So when we go through the other pitchers, Hayden Wesneski still has an option year, but Tyson Miller does not. Keegan Thompson does not. Caleb Killian does not. Julian Merriweather does not. Trey Wingenter is no longer here. He got DFA'd for Matt Tice. Rob Zastryzny, who the Cubs just brought back, does not have any options. So there are some pitchers in there that cannot start or go up and down. So those guys, the question will be, do they make the team out of spring training, or do they get DFA'd or traded or something? That would be how many pitchers? 1, 2, 3, 4. And you've got more guys than that in the big. So the question with some of these guys, let's just take them as they come. So they're kind of interesting here. So Hayden Wesneski still has an option year left, still makes league minimum. His starter depth, at times he looks really good. At times he's kind of a mess. He's started and he's relieved. I think he'll earn whatever he gets in spring training. But he is a guy who is definitely going to have to earn a role. But he's organizational depth. He's pre-arb, he's league minimum, has an option year left. You're definitely going to tender him a contract. And unless he's included in the trade, he's going to be with the Cubs on the 40-man all year in 2025. Tyson Miller looked really good last season, so hopefully he builds on that and is a core piece of the bullpen. If at some point he really struggles, then with no options left, he'll get DFA'd like he did in Seattle and probably wind up somewhere else. Keegan Thompson's really interesting. Keegan Thompson has at times looked really, really good, borderline dominant out of the bullpen. He's now in his first arbitration year. He's expected to get about $1.2 million in salary. No options left. So the last couple of years, he's been up and down. Last 3 years, he's been up and down. And that's not going to be an option this year. So he, again, is either going to make the team probably in the bullpen out of spring training, or he's probably going elsewhere. He's definitely a prime candidate to be included in a trade. So it'd be interesting to see what the Cubs do with him. We go to Caleb Killian. He's looked really, really good at times, but he can't live in Iowa anymore. So he, again, is either going to have to, I don't see him making the Cubs rotation out of spring training unless he's absolutely, he did look really good last year before getting hurt. So we'll see. He's definitely a non-tender candidate, although he is pre-arb, so they'll probably keep him for as long as they can. But I would look at him for maybe making a switch to the bullpen and see what he can do in spring training there and see if he can carve out a role in the big league team. Going through other guys, I think Porter Hodge is going to start the season as a closer unless the Cubs go sign one, but he's definitely going to be a leverage arm in that bullpen to start the season. He's got 3 option years left. He's got league minimum. He's pre-arb for several more years. Ethan Roberts is interesting. He does have 2 option years left, but he now goes into arbitration. I don't think he's going to get a huge raise. They estimate him at $850K, a little bit more than league minimum. But the Cubs clearly like him, and they've been trying to keep him in that bullpen, and they've got the options to do it and the space to do it. So we'll see. I expect him to stick, but he's one to kind of watch. I think Nate Pearson showed last year that he's going to get a shot. He does have 1 option year left. He's ARB 2, projected to get about $1.25 million. Go down the list. Julian Merriweather is going to be very interesting. He's ARB 2, coming off what was really a disastrous lost season for him. He's expected to make $1.3 million through arbitration. No options left. So, again, he is a DFA. He is a non-tender candidate this week. But I also wouldn't be surprised if the Cubs continue to work with him in the offseason, get him working with Tyler Gombro and Zombro, not Gombro, Tyler Zombro, and see if they can get him back to his 2023 form. he was a pretty elite reliever in 2023. Now, relievers are volatile. We'll know that. That's why the Cubs need to have as many options as possible on this roster that can come up and pitch. Jordan Wicks probably get a chance. I expect the Cubs to bring in one starting pitcher. There's a chance they bring in two. If they bring in two, then you're pretty much looking at the two new additions plus Steele, Liminaga, and Tyone. And then you've got Wicks and Ben Brown and Wisniewski and Killian and whoever. At that point, Killian's either in the bullpen or not around. But you've got those guys then fighting out for depth. You've also got Cade Horton and Brandon Birdsell, both pretty much major league ready if they're healthy and performing through the spring. But Merriweather's interesting. He's getting more expensive, no options. So we'll see. He could also always start the team. If he has a good spring, start with the team. And if he struggles, winds up getting DFA'd and potentially traded or released. Gavin Hollowell is an arm they brought in late last year. He's got one option left. He's league minimum. I would expect him to hang around for sure. Jack Neely, Luke Little, both those guys throw hard, do some good things. They are league minimum, pre-arbitration. They'll be around. They're potentially really big parts of the bullpen next year if they can be healthy. Rob Zastryzny, he has no options left. The Cubs brought him in. I think they expect to let him compete for a job or else they wouldn't have brought him back. He's an older guy, lefty, was with the Cubs back in 2016. So he was with them from 2016 to, I think, 2019 or 2020. And they have Michael Arias, who they added to the 40-man roster this time last year because of the Rule 5 draft. He's not been up to Chicago yet, but again, he's pre-arb. He's got 2 option years left, league minimum, no-brainer to keep around. So what are they going to do? They got some interesting decisions. I think it's going to be fun to watch. And if I was going to guess, I think that anybody with options will stay. They could be included in trades and sort the rest out in spring training. I think Julian Merriweather will get tendered a contract, but I'm probably only 60-40 there. I think Caleb Killian will as well, especially being pre-arb. I think he's one they will just let go and see what happens over the offseason, see how he looks in spring training. Maybe you can get somebody. Yeah, I could see him going to work out a trade with a bad team. He could absolutely live in somebody's bullpen for sure. But it's going to be interesting. I do, nothing against Nick the Stick, or Nick the Not Stick. Nicky 3 steps, Nicky 5 steps, whatever you prefer to call him. I would expect that Nick Madrigal gets non-tendered. And we'll go from there. But yeah, I wanted to just sit down and talk through some of these moves. I think the Cubs are in an interesting position. I kind of projected the Cubs bullpen to be Tyson Miller, Porter Hodge, Nate Pearson, Keegan Thompson, now Eli Morgan. And then they had the 3 guys they brought in. We'll see if they bring in 3. If not, maybe there's room for somebody else. I would love to see Jack Neely and Luke Little force their way into that bullpen. Jordan Wicks could potentially be in the bullpen, although I think they'll keep him stretched out to start. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and that would give the Cubs depth. So if the roster worked out that way, they would have Jordan Wicks, Hayden Wisniewski, Ben Brown, potentially as starter depth in the minors. They would have, somehow I missed Brown on my list. He also has plenty of options, league minimum. Throws hard. He's interesting. If he can get back to health, I've not heard any updated reports on his neck lately. But if he's there, he looked really good out of the bullpen, and he also still has the stuff to be a starter. So he's another guy who could be a power arm at the back end of that bullpen. But they would have Wicks, Wisniewski, Brown, for sure, starter depth, plus Birdsell and Horton. If they're healthy and right the way I have it projected out at the moment. Jack Neely, Luke Little, Ethan Roberts, Gavin Hollowell has bullpen depth, but I've added Rob Zastryzny to the 40-man, but not to the updated active roster, so I'll continue to work with that as the season goes. But if you take out the money for those guys that I talked about pulling in, just to get back to the CBT, the Cubs have about $40 million to spend, as far as I can tell, if I'm doing the math correctly. And it seemed to work out last time. So $40 million can go a lot of different directions. I think there are a lot of really good relievers in that low middle tier relievers. I mean, Ryan Stanek, AJ Minter, probably both projected to get about $3 million. Jorge Lopez, we know, was solid last year. Probably same ballpark. You could go a little bit higher, shop in that market. I don't see the Cubs going Tanner Scott. You're probably talking $17 to $20 million, depending on how many teams want to go in on a closer. Clay Holmes is out there. He's going to cost you 15 plus. Given the volatility in bullpens and relief pitchers, the question is, are they going to give you enough to justify that extra expense? And, with the arms the Cubs have, I'm not sure that's the case, but we'll see. I think also, obviously, trading for relief pitching is very much a possibility as well, as the Cubs did today. It'll be interesting to see what they do. I'll tease out something else. I've enjoyed the interactions on Blue Sky. I've been over there for a while, ever since it looked like Twitter was having some technical issues last summer. Picked up a lot of followers on Blue Sky. So if you found my podcast from Blue Sky, welcome. It's been fun interacting over there. I continue to be very active on Twitter. Less so on the others. I've always gotten most of my engagement from Twitter or X. Getting some good engagement from Blue Sky. I try to cut clips of the show. Sometimes hard to do it. I don't always have a lot of time, but try to cut clips of the show for TikTok and Instagram shorts. But I really appreciate you guys as an audience. And I'm going to add another segment to these shows going forward. I may not have it for my next episode, but I will the one after. I want to start looking at baseball rules. Baseball has a lot of crazy rules that are sometimes hard to understand. Some rules you don't understand why they're even in there. Some rules are only sort of randomly enforced. So I'm going to take user suggestions. So if you listen to these, drop me an instant message, tweet at me, whatever. If there's a rule you want more explanation on, if there's a rule you want to know the origin story for, this is going to be a lot of fun. I love baseball history. I love baseball stories. I love talking about the game in different ways, new rules, old rules. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've got a couple in the back pocket. I've already picked up. I've thrown a couple things out on social media, picked up a couple ideas. So I'm not quite sure what to call it yet, but I think it's going to be a fun little segment, and it's going to give me something interesting to dive into, especially this off season. But be well. Thanksgiving's around the corner. I'll probably have one more episode before the holiday. I'm working on getting some other interviews lined up. I think I'm going to make an appearance on the Bricks Behind the Ivy podcast here soon, possibly Friday or Monday. I think we're supposed to record tonight, and I think that's his posting schedule. Check that out. Check out all of our shows at Bleacher Bunch. I don't always say it enough, but if you're looking for the show, if you're looking for CubsPS Plus and you search, you'll probably find it anyway, but you might find my old feed. We are under the Bleacher Bunch umbrella, and then under that umbrella are Cup of Cuppy Blue, Sun Ranto. And we're trying to add more content there. We're trying to get, be kind of a fans-focused network where we have regular content. And Danny Rocket's going to drive in that. I'm helping him out. And along with Sarah Sanchez as part of that group, Michael Cotton, Infield Fly Girl. We're trying to add more and more people to that. So stay tuned. But I'm going to have Danny on the show here coming up probably early December, maybe ahead of the Sun Ranto Cubs caroling, or maybe just after, either preview it or talk about it after the fact. But it'll be a good off season, and there's going to be a lot to watch with this team. As we've said, this team has to get better. And with what they have in place, there are really only a few spots to do it. As I see it right now, if the Cubs don't make major trades with core pieces that they have in place, they can get some upgrades at the catcher position. They can upgrade the bullpen. They can add a starting pitcher or two, and they're upgrading the bench. And upgrading the bench is critical. That's where the Patrick Wisdom DFA today is big. It's where I think Nick Madrigal non-tender or DFA would also be big. The Cubs just need to have more upside on the bench. And I like Mike Tauchman there. Who knows if PCA is going to wind up running into a wall at some point, or who knows, he may have more struggles. Baseball players have struggles. That's why while I was interested in getting Cody Bellinger's money back for Jed to potentially spend, Michael Busch may continue to have some struggles too. I like what I've seen from both Michael Busch and Pete Crow Armstrong have shown the ability to make adjustments to Major League pitching and get better. And that's a really good thing to see early in a guy's career. Just gives you confidence they can do it over time. But this bench has to be a bench that Craig Counsell is comfortable playing. If he doesn't have a bench that he's comfortable playing, we wind up with Dansby and Nico and Bellinger, Happ literally playing every single day, playing through injuries. And as we saw so many times last year, when guys play hurt, they're just not as effective. And I get there's a line where Dansby Swanson at 95% is maybe better than your backup shortstop. But also, that's not always the case, because sometimes it's not 95% of Dansby Swanson. Sometimes it's 60% of Dansby Swanson. And maybe an extra day or two of rest lets him heal a little bit more quickly, get back up more to the full version of Dansby Swanson. and just have a bench that is not that big of a drop-off. But when the bench is Patrick Wisdom, Nick Madrigal, Miles Mastrobuoni, there's a big drop. And so those guys have to play. So I think watch the bench additions. You're going to see, like, Matt Tice today, I think, is a nothing addition. I don't even know if he'll be with the team by spring training. But you're going to see the Cubs make some moves for lower tier guys. And a certain percentage of the fan base is not going to like it. They're going to complain about not being serious, not being a serious franchise, not going for big players. Not every move is a big player. The Cubs do need to make some big moves. Absolutely. But they also need to make that bench better. And in some cases, that making that bench better might be letting Alcantara or Caissie or Canario or Matt Shaw take one of those spots. If people will say that the minor leaguers have to play every day, the minor leaguers have to be playing regularly. If you think Matt Shaw has a shot at potentially being Rookie of the Year next year, he should be on the opening day roster. Paul Skeens just won the Rookie of the Year for Pittsburgh. Under the new labor rules, got a full year of service time. So it ended any shot at service time manipulation with the Pirates. But because he wasn't on the opening day roster, the Pirates didn't benefit from getting the extra draft pick they could have picked up for having him on that roster. I don't know. I can probably argue Skeens either way, given sensitivity to pitchers' arms and starting him late. But if you think Matt Shaw could be at all an impact player for the Cubs next year, have him on the opening day roster. He doesn't have to start every day, but he can start 3 days a week. Come up and let him play for a couple weeks, and he can get some run at third base. He can get some run at DH. He can maybe play a little second base. We're talking about getting these guys off their feet anyway, and that includes early in the season. You know, you don't want to wait till Dansby is exhausted and his performance is declining to give him a day off. Like, just let's have this be a regular thing. And so you can get a lot of that from the bench. Owen, Caissie, Matt Shaw could be bench pieces next year. Or at worst, you wait for an injury to happen. And then, if Dansby gets hurt, rather than play through a bad knee for 2 weeks, maybe you put him on the injured list for 10, 15 days. Nico Horner switches over to play shortstop, and Matt Shaw comes up and plays second base or something like that. And he comes up knowing, hey, like happened so many times in the past with the old core, with Schwarber, with Contreras, has what happened with PCA last year. You're going to come up, you're going to get a shot to play. The plan is to send you back down. And then you see if the guy can just force his way into not being sent back down. And that's what we want. But watch for those bench moves. Those bench moves are going to be important this year, even if they're not sexy. But more to come. Be well. Hopefully I'll talk to you guys again before Thanksgiving. Go Cubs. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And share the episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page, patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS Plus podcast, part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!